What if I told you the most terrifying monsters are real? They aren't hiding under your bed or lurking in some dark forest. They're people we might see every day, and sometimes the monster is a belief that drives people to do unspeakable things. The stories you're about to hear aren't from a Hollywood script. They're drawn from official records and the harrowing accounts of those who were there. Today, we're exploring three cases where real life proved to be far more horrifying than fiction. Our first story begins in North London in August of 2016, inside a £1.3 million, seven-bedroom home. This was the residence of the Ife family, headed by Dr. Kenneth Ife, a man with a PhD, and his wife, Josephine. On the surface, they were a successful, educated, and deeply religious family. But their faith would soon lead them down a dark and tragic path. It all started when their 26-year-old son, Kennedy, began to feel unwell. At first, it was just a sore throat, but his condition quickly got worse. He told doctors he felt a strange sensation, as if something was crawling inside his throat. Medical professionals couldn't find any physical reason for his distress. Soon after, his behavior became erratic and aggressive. He grew violent, even biting his father at one point. He ranted about the mark of the beast 666 and complained that a python or a snake was inside him. For the Ife family, described as charismatic Christians, the explanation wasn't medical, it was spiritual. They believed Kennedy wasn't sick, but possessed. Instead of calling an ambulance, they called their church minister for advice and decided to take matters into their own hands. What followed was a 3-day ordeal of what prosecutors would later call torture, all in the name of salvation. The family, including Kennedy's 5 brothers, decided the only way to cure him was through restraint and prayer. They bound him to his bed with cable ties, rope, and handcuffs. His father instructed his other sons to work in shifts, using overwhelming force if necessary to keep Kennedy held down. His brother, Colin, later told police, "It's clear that thing was in him. What we believed was a demon because it was not natural. It was clearly trying to kill him. We had to restrain him for himself." For the next 67 hours, Kennedy was held captive in his own home, treated, as prosecutors would later say, like an animal or a detainee. He screamed and growled as his family prayed over him. Reports from the trial mention his mother, Josephine, told police her son had been fighting amongst himself, and phone recordings of the events were later found. On the morning of August 22nd, Kennedy's brother finally called 999, telling the operator his brother was dehydrated. When paramedics arrived, they found Kennedy unresponsive and still tied to the bed. The restraints were so tight, they were cutting off his breathing. His body was covered in over 60 injuries, and he had a life-threateningly high temperature. As the medical team desperately tried to save him, the family just kept praying. But it was too late. Kennedy Ife was pronounced dead at 10:17 a.m. Even as police arrived, the family's belief didn't waver. Officers witnessed his brother Colin attempting a resurrection ritual, chanting, "Kennedy, I commend you to rise in the name of Jesus." All 7 family members were arrested and charged with manslaughter and false imprisonment. During the trial, prosecutors revealed a false imprisonment kit with handcuffs and hundreds of cable ties that the family had tried to hide. In a shocking conclusion, however, a jury acquitted the entire family on all charges in March 2019. They were free to go, leaving behind the haunting question of where faith ends and a fatal delusion begins. Our next story takes us to Gary, Indiana, and a small, unassuming rental house on Carolina Street. In November 2011, LaToya Ammons, her mother Rosa Campbell, and her 3 young children moved in, hoping for a fresh start. What they found instead was a nightmare, one that would eventually be documented in nearly 800 pages of official police and child services reports. It began subtly. Despite the winter cold, swarms of large black flies would infest their screened-in porch. Then came the sounds at night. Footsteps coming up from the basement, followed by the kitchen door creaking open, but no one was ever there. Rosa Campbell, the grandmother, even saw a shadowy figure of a man pacing in the living room. Soon, the strange activity seemed to focus on the children. LaToya's 12-year-old daughter reportedly levitated unconscious above her bed during a sleepover. The family was so terrified they just prayed until she came back down, with the girl having no memory of it afterward. The children's personalities began to shift. It was claimed their eyes would bulge and evil smiles would cross their faces as they spoke in unnaturally deep voices. The youngest son started talking to an invisible boy in a closet, one who told him what it was like to be killed. The middle son was allegedly thrown across the room by a force no one could see. Terrified, the family sought help from doctors, churches, and eventually the authorities. This is where the Ammons case becomes uniquely chilling, because it wasn't just the family making these claims. It was witnessed by professionals. In April 2012, the Department of Child Services, DCS, got involved. During a hospital evaluation, family case manager Valerie Washington and a registered nurse named Willie Lee Walker witnessed something they couldn't explain. In an official DCS report, Washington documented the unbelievable event. She claimed she saw LaToya's 9-year-old son, with a weird grin on his face, walk smoothly backward up a wall and onto the ceiling, then flip over his grandmother and land on his feet. Both women reportedly fled the room in terror. The family physician, Dr. Jeffrey Onyukwu, who at first suspected delusions, later admitted to reporters, 20 years, and I've never heard anything like that in my life. I was scared myself when I walked into the room. The case even shook a 36-year veteran of the Gary Police Department, Captain Charles Austin. Austin started as a skeptic, but became a believer after visiting the home and experiencing strange events himself, including his police radio malfunctioning and his car seat moving on its own. He later told the Indianapolis Star, "I am a believer." A Catholic priest, Father Michael Maginot, was eventually given permission by the local bishop to perform multiple exorcisms on LaToya. After the family moved out, the paranormal activity reportedly stopped for them. The house on Carolina Street, which some had dubbed a portal to hell, was purchased by paranormal investigator Zach Bagans in 2014 and demolished 2 years later. The case remains one of the most well-documented and terrifying accounts of alleged demonic possession, not just because of the family's story, but because of the official reports from those who were sent to help. Our first 2 stories are backed by official records and witness statements. This last one is different. It's a story that lives in the dark corners of the internet, a kind of modern urban legend. And while we can't point to a police file with names and dates, it's a story that feels terrifyingly real because it taps into one of our deepest fears, the fear of being watched. This account comes from a family who moved to a new home, excited for the peace and quiet of a more rural setting. That peace didn't last. It started with a feeling, that nagging sense of being observed when they were in their yard or near the windows. Then, they started catching glimpses of a figure, a man, lurking at the edge of their property, just beyond the tree line. He would stand there, motionless, simply watching. Whenever they tried to approach or call out, he would melt back into the woods and disappear. The police were called, but the man was always gone by the time they arrived. With no evidence of a break-in or a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. The family was just told to stay vigilant, but the stranger's presence grew bolder. One afternoon, the father went to an old shed at the back of the property. Inside, on a dusty workbench, he found bizarre and disturbing symbols crudely carved into the wood. In a corner, he found a small pile of animal bones, cleaned and arranged in a deliberate pattern. But the deepest dread came from what he found next. A backpack tucked away behind some old equipment. Inside were wallets, watches, and personal items that didn't belong to them. It looked like a collection of trophies. That discovery shifted their fear into panic. This wasn't just some person watching from a distance. This was someone who had been on their property, inside their buildings. The police were called again, and this time they took the backpack for evidence. But without any leads, the watcher remained a mystery. The final, horrifying event happened a few weeks later. Their family dog, who was always let out into their fenced backyard, went missing. They searched for hours, calling its name until their voices were raw. The next day, the mother looked out the kitchen window and saw him. The stranger was at the edge of the woods again. This time, he wasn't empty-handed. In one hand, he held a long, gleaming knife. In the other, he was dangling their dog's collar. He held her gaze for just a moment, a silent, terrifying message passing between them. Then he turned and vanished back into the trees. The family, completely broken and terrified, moved out within the week. And that's where the story ends. The man who watched them from the woods, if he was ever real, was never caught. He exists now only as a chilling story, a faceless phantom who shattered a family's life with nothing more than his presence. So, what's scarier? A misguided faith that turns deadly? A house that terrifies police officers? Or a silent stalker in the woods? These stories show that the line between the world we know and the horror we fear is terrifyingly thin. Sometimes, the truth is far more disturbing than any movie, because it reminds us that these things can and do happen. Which of these stories did you find the most unsettling? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to explore more cases where reality is stranger and more terrifying than fiction, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you have your own true disturbing story you'd like to share, you can submit it to the email in the description. You never know, your story might just be in a future video. Thanks for watching.